welcome you on behalf of the research team and today's speakers. This presentation has been made possible thanks to two SURE grants, Fairy Tale Films Exploring Ethnographic Perspectives, and another one that we're not allowed to publicly announce until it's publicly announced on the SURE website, so it'll be We thank SURE for their support of us and other researchers in Canada and the world. In Donald Hassa and Duggan's 2013 editorial in Marbles and Tales, Journal of Fairy Tale Studies, they note the innovative fairy tale research taking place at the University of Winnipeg. Yes. 4 UW faculty members are currently participating in projects that support this event, along with 3 fabulous research assistants and 1 fabulous research coordinator. Our work connects the University of Winnipeg with scholars and institutions in Canada, India, the Netherlands, and the United States. And now a bit about the research. Arthur Frank notes that stories question what kind of truth is being told, but never resolve that question. Their work is to remind us that we have to live with complicated truths. To understand the real-world work of fairy tales in significant new ways, speakers today consider fairy tales, intertextual and intermedial expressions on film, television, and other televisual media, their uses in fan cultures and fan fiction, their persistence in oral traditions among source and revival tellers, their transnational and post-colonial manifestations, and their morality and concepts of crime and justice. Using the term fairy tale cultures invokes Christina Bakilega's idea of the fairy tale web. More than just discrete, identifiable stories, fairy tales offer a broad discourse informing understanding of diverse aspects of society, implicating the economic as well as the social and cultural. For example, a Cinderella story in the news presumes sudden financial and personal success, which on closer inspection usually reveals a much more complex etiology of kinship relations, social class, and personal integrity or lack thereof, as does the traditional tale type. North American and European society today is inundated by fairy tales. Fairy tale concepts and images have become so quotidian that they often go unnoticed. And yet, the idea of an event or an individual being like or unlike a fairy tale or fairy tale character pervades communication from personal discussion to mass media. And in response to this multiplicity, fairy tale studies, like the work you're going to be hearing about today, have historically and internationally been transnational, multidisciplinary, and interdisciplinary. Fairy tales, as we approach them, include literary stories by an individual author like Hans Christian Andersen, and traditional narratives, international, historical wonder tales or tales of magic. Yet both forms intertextually and intermediately relate to earlier and later manifestations, translated into different languages, cultural contexts, forms, and media. Traditional wonder tales, like literary fairy tales, deal with the supernatural, magical adversaries, tasks, helpers, objects of power, and knowledge. Hassa points out that fairy tales demonstrate chaotic, highly ambiguous, symbolic codes that invite diverse responses, which reflect a recipient's experience, perspective, or predisposition. They currently feature heterotopias, otherworldly realms wherein reality appears topsy-turvy, terrible, fabulous, supernatural events and beings call into question the commonsensical and familiar. The speakers today question fairy tales' reputation as trivial childhood diversions. They affirm fairy tales' perennial historical, cross-cultural, multi-generational popularity, suggesting value far beyond mere entertainment. Each fairy tale telling forms a copy of which there is no original, and even literary fairy tales get translated, adapted, filmed, televised, and otherwise mediated. And single-authored written texts are poor models for understanding fairy tales. As adaptations, which Linda Hutcheon calls repetition without replication, fairy tale intertexts offer acknowledged transposition of a recognizable other work or works, a creative and interpretive act of appropriation or salvaging. And considering their intermediality encourages attention to how fairy tales engage a wide variety of semiotic modes and technological channels. For example, fairy tales emerge in fan fiction, wherein viewers explore or dispute media narratives within a literary, artistic, interpretive community not bound by commercial and institutionalized discourses. Much fan fiction responds to multiple narrative forms. Fairy tale motifs and plot lines appear in fan fiction addressing fantasy, science fiction, or horror genres, borrowing narratives and structures to reinterpret other texts and transposing the story world or genre onto other concepts. And fandoms also form around sources like the televised Beauty and the Beast or Once Upon a Time. Texts often engage not only with individual fairy tales and motifs, but also with popular conceptions of the genre, and thus contribute to an ongoing cultural renegotiation, repetition, and reconfiguration of fairy tales. Such experiments negotiate between genre structures and storytelling histories, illuminating how audiences reconcile current mass media with fairy tales' poetic and political baseline. As a culture of production, fan fiction invokes pre-capitalist structures of oral storytelling before copyright granted formal authority to single versions of fictional narratives. And now, while some scholarship, wrongly we think, seeks to divine a single written source for fairy tales, we find such urtext searches not only ultimately unfruitful, but also unreflective of the genre's intertextual intermedial qualities. Given fairy tales as fluid texts, but also symbolic acts with wide-ranging aesthetic, educational, and political impact, their discourse embodies different power struggles within specific cultural fields, such as well as social historical contexts, including social criticism and action. Frank's socio-narratology asks how stories inform in the sense of giving information, but also give form, temporal and spatial orientation, coherence, meaning, intention, and especially boundaries to lives. Yet he also warns that such a process can be a gift or a danger. Fairy tales are generally recognized as international, finding specific cultural expression in different locations and times. Only recently have scholars begun looking at fairy tales' transnational and post-colonial implications. Issues include not only publication and ownership, but also the cultural politics of stories more generally. And traditional cultural views on law and legal issues are expressed in fairy tale versions. Law and criminology studies sometimes note their moralistic qualities and their potential for illuminating sociocultural understanding. Nicole Rafter's call for a popular criminology recognizes cultural texts, including fairy tales, as modes for exploring knowledge about crime and justice. Stories explore moral, ethical, and philosophical dimensions in ways rarely addressed in conventional social, scientific, criminological discourse. And I will wisely give the last word to Jack Sykes. Fairy tales are informed by human disposition to action, to transform to transform the world and make it more adaptable to human needs, while we try to change and make ourselves fit for the world. Thank you.